Hey world, and welcome to my YouTube. I shall be reading to you all the background information of the Revelation of St. John. And make sure to check out my other videos and playlists as well. I have mainly music videos, majority of them are piano only. But I also have some other videos that are not just piano. I have some teaching videos, I have some chess videos, I have some other scripture and prayer videos as well. So now that my ad is over, I now will read to you all the Revelation to John background information. The Apocalypse, or Revelation to John, the last book of the Bible, is one of the most difficult to understand because it abounds in unfamiliar and extravagant symbolism, which at best appears unusual to the modern reader. Symbolic language, however, is one of the chief characteristics of apostolic literature, of which this book is an outstanding example. Such literature enjoyed wide popularity in both Jewish and Christian circles from around 200 BC to 200 AD. This book contains an account of visions in symbolic and allegorical language borrowed extensively from the Old Testament, especially Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Daniel. Whether or not these visions were real experiences of the author or simply literary conventions employed by him is an open question. This much, however, is certain. Symbolic descriptions are not to be taken as literal descriptions, nor is the symbolism meant to be pictured realistically. One would find it difficult and repulsive to visualize a lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes. Yet, Jesus Christ is described in precisely such words. Chapter 5, verse 6. The author used these images to suggest Christ's universal 7 power horns and knowledge eyes. A significant feature of apocalyptic writing is the use of symbolic colors, metals, garments. Chapter 1, verse 13 through chapter 16, verse 3, chapter 18, verse 4, chapter 4, verse 6, chapter 1. Okay, back to the beginning here. Chapter 1, verses, chapter 1, verse 13 through chapter 16, verse 3. Chapter 18, verse 4. Chapter 4, verse 6 through verses 1 through 8, chapter 17, verse 4, chapter 19, verse 8. I hope I got those chapters and verses correct. And we continue. And Numbers 4 signifies the world, 6 imperfection, 7 totality of perfection, 12 Israel's tribes or the apostles, 1,000 immensity. Finally, the vindictive language in the book, chapter 6, verses 9 and 10, chapter 18, verse 1 through chapter 19, verse 4, is also to be understood symbolically and not literally. The cries for vengeance on the lips of the Christian martyrs that sound so harsh are in fact literary devices the author employed to invoke in the reader and hearer a feeling of horror for apostasy and rebellion that will be severely punished by God. The lurid descriptions of the punishment of Jezebel, chapter 2, verse 22, and of the destruction of the great harlot Babylon, chapter 16, verse 9 through chapter 19, verse 2, are likewise literary devices. The metaphor of Babylon as harlot would be wrongly construed if interpreted literally. On the other hand, the stylized figure of the woman clothed with the sun, chapter 12, verse 1 through 6, depicting the new Israel, may seem to be a negative stereotype. It is necessary to look beyond the literal meaning to see what these images mean to convey a sense of God's wrath at sin in the former case and trust in God's providential care over the church in the latter. The book of Revelation cannot be adequately understood except against the historical background that occasioned its writing. Like Daniel and other apocalypses, it was composed as a resistance literature to meet a crisis. The book itself suggests that the crisis was ruthless persecution of the early church by the Roman authorities. The harlot Babylon symbolizes pagan Rome. The city on seven hills, chapter 17, verse 9. The book is then an exhortation and admonition to Christians of the first century to stand firm in the faith and to avoid compromise with paganism. Despite the threat of adversary and martyrdom, they are to await patiently the fulfillment of God's mighty promises. The triumph of God in the world of men and women remains a mystery, to be accepted in faith and longed for in hope. It is a triumph that unfolded in the history of Jesus of Nazareth and continues to unfold in the history of the individual Christian who follows the way of the cross, even if necessary to a martyr's death. Though the perspective is eschatological, ultimate salvation and victory are said to take place at the end of the present age, when Christ will come in glory at the parousia. The book presents the decisive struggle of Christ and his followers against Satan and his cohorts as already over. Christ's overwhelming defeat of the kingdom of Satan ushered in the everlasting reign of God. Chapter 11, verse 15, chapter 12, verse 10. Even the forces of evil unwittingly carry out the divine plan. Chapter 17, verse 17. For God is the sovereign Lord of history. The book of Revelation had its origin in the time of crisis, but it remains valid and meaningful for Christians of all time. In the face of apparently insuperable evil, either from within or from without, all Christians are called to trust in Jesus' promise. Behold, I am with you always until the end of the age. Matthew 28:20. Those who remain steadfast in their faith and confidence in the risen Lord need have no fear. Suffering, persecution, even death through martyrdom, though remaining impenetrable mysteries of evil, do not compare an observed dead end. No matter what adversary or sacrifice Christians may endure, they will, in the end, triumph over Satan and his forces because of their fidelity to Christ the victor. This is the enduring message of this book. It is a message of hope and consolation and challenge for all who dare to believe. The author of the book calls himself John. Chapter 1, verse 1 decimal 4 decimal. Okay. Chapter 1, verses 1 and 4 and 9. chapter 22, verse 8, who, because of his Christian faith, has been exiled to the rocky island of Patmos, a Roman penal colony. Although he never claims to be John the Apostle, whose name is attached to the fourth Gospel, he was so identified by several of the early church fathers, including Justin, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian, Cyprian, and Hippolytus. This identification, however, was denied by other fathers, including Denis of Alexandria, Eusebius of Caesarea, Cyril of Jerusalem, Gregory Nazianzen, and John Chrysostom. Indeed, vocabulary, grammar, and style make it doubtful that the book could have been put into present form by the same persons responsible for the fourth Gospel. Nevertheless, there are definite linguistic and theological affinities between the two books. The tone of the letters to the seven churches, chapter 1, verse 4 through chapter 3, verse 22, is indicative of the great authority the author enjoyed over the Christian communities in Asia. It is possible, therefore, that he was a disciple of John the Apostle, who is traditionally associated with that part of the world. The date of the book in its present form is probably near the end of the reign of Domitian, 81 AD to 96 AD, a fierce persecutor of the Christians. The principal divisions of the Book of Revelation are the following. Book 1, Prologue, chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. Book 2, Letters to the Churches of Asia, chapter 1, verse 4 through chapter 3, verse 22. Book 3, God and the Lamb in Heaven, chapter 4, verse 1 through chapter 5, verse 14. Book 4, the seven seals, trumpets, and plagues with interludes, chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 16, verse 21. Book 5, the punishment of Babylon and the destruction of pagan nations, chapter 17, verse 1 through chapter 20, verse 15. Book 6, the new creation, chapter 21, verse 1 through chapter 22, verse 5. And finally, Book 7, Epilogue, chapter 22, verses 6 through 21. And thank you for watching this video.